There's something unsettling about human behavior that most people don't like to admit. Intelligence doesn't always show itself in obvious ways. In fact, some of the most important signals are not loud at all. They are subtle, quiet, almost hidden in everyday habits. And according to behavioral research and long-standing psychological observations, there are patterns of thinking and reacting that tend to show up in people who struggle with critical reasoning, adaptability, and problem-solving skills. Now, this is not about labeling individuals or reducing anyone to a number. Intelligence is complex, fluid, and deeply influenced by environment, education, and emotional development. But there are certain behavioral signs that often point toward very limited cognitive flexibility. And once you start noticing them, you can't unsee them. Let's take a closer look. One of the most commonly observed patterns is an extreme resistance to new information. Not just disagreement, but automatic rejection. When new ideas are presented, instead of evaluating them, the reaction is immediate dismissal. No curiosity, no internal questioning, just a hard stop. Research in cognitive psychology often describes this as closed reasoning loops. It's when a person's mind doesn't process new data. It simply compares it to what they already believe, and anything unfamiliar gets rejected instantly. It creates a dangerous cycle, because the less new information a person accepts, the less their thinking evolves. And the less it evolves, the more rigid it becomes. It's almost like mental handwriting that never changes, no matter how messy it gets. Another sign often highlighted in behavioral studies is difficulty understanding cause and effect over time. These individuals tend to focus only on immediate outcomes. If something feels good now, it must be right. If something feels uncomfortable now, it must be wrong. But life doesn't work in isolated moments. It works in chains of consequences. For example, actions taken today often shape outcomes weeks, months, or even years later. But when long-term reasoning is weak, decisions become impulsive and short-sighted. This is why patterns repeat. The same mistakes, the same outcomes, just different days. And when those outcomes arrive, there's confusion, as if life acted unfairly, when in reality, the pattern was always there. A third indicator is an over-reliance on emotional reasoning instead of logical evaluation. This doesn't mean emotions are bad. Emotions are essential. They guide empathy, connection, and meaning. But when emotion completely replaces logic, judgment becomes unstable. Instead of asking, "Is this true?" the question becomes, "Do I like this?" Instead of, "Does this make sense?" it becomes, "Does this feel right?" And feelings, as powerful as they are, can be influenced by fear, ego, insecurity, or even misinformation. And when feelings become the only compass, direction is no longer reliable. Another pattern often observed is difficulty in adapting to changing situations. People with low cognitive flexibility tend to rely heavily on familiar routines and fixed ways of thinking. When something unexpected happens, they struggle to adjust. Even small changes can trigger frustration, denial, or avoidance. Research often connects this to weak executive functioning, the mental system responsible for planning, shifting attention, and adjusting strategies. In real life, this looks like someone who insists, "This is how it's always done," even when it clearly no longer works. And the world doesn't stay still for anyone. There is also a noticeable tendency toward oversimplified thinking. Complex issues are reduced into extreme categories: right or wrong, good or bad, smart or stupid. Nuance disappears. But reality is rarely simple. Most situations exist in layers: economic, emotional, psychological, and environmental factors all interacting at once. When someone cannot process complexity, they default to black and white conclusions. It feels easier, cleaner, more certain, but it also removes understanding. And without understanding, judgment becomes shallow. Another sign, often mentioned in behavioral observation studies, is an inability to learn from repeated feedback. This is different from simply making mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The key difference is what happens after. Some people adjust, they reflect, they adapt. Others repeat the same cycle endlessly, even when the outcome is predictable. It's almost as if feedback doesn't land, like experience doesn't accumulate into wisdom. And over time, life becomes a loop instead of a lesson. Now here's something important. None of these traits exist in isolation. Everyone, at some point, can show moments of poor judgment, emotional thinking, or resistance to change. That doesn't define intelligence. But when these patterns dominate a person's behavior consistently, they begin to limit growth, relationships, and decision-making ability. And that's where the real issue lies, not in intelligence itself, but in the refusal or inability to evolve thinking over time. There is one final observation that stands out in many psychological discussions: the strong need to appear correct, even when evidence suggests otherwise. For some individuals, being wrong feels intolerable, not uncomfortable, but threatening. So instead of adjusting their view, they double down. They defend, they argue, they distort. Because in that moment, being right matters more than understanding truth. And ironically, that is often where learning stops completely. Because the mind that refuses correction refuses growth. So what does all of this really mean? It means intelligence is not just about knowledge. It's not just about memory or information. It's about flexibility, adaptation, reflection, and the willingness to update one's thinking when reality demands it. Without those, even a knowledgeable mind can become trapped in limitation. And with them, even a simple mind can grow far beyond expectation. In the end, the real danger is not lack of intelligence. It's the habits of thinking that quietly prevent it from expanding. Because once those habits take root, they don't just shape decisions, they shape a life. And maybe the most important question isn't, how intelligent am I? But instead, how often do I allow myself to be wrong so I can become better? Thank you for watching. If you found this insightful, consider subscribing for more psychological storytelling and deep human behavior explorations. And as always, see you in the next one.